looking at you, kid.
I'm Charles Foster Kane!
Hey, Stella!
Suck on this.
What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. Today we have a very special video, a birthday present to myself, where I'm going to tackle one of my all-time favorite movies with the great David Lambert, who is more than a little fond of the film as well. But the topic at hand is the recent Criterion Collection Blu-ray release of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, a movie that in my misspent youth I frequently described as my desert island movie. Not necessarily my favorite movie, but the one I would take with me if I was allowed to take only one movie into permanent exile. And having now watched 3 versions of the movie over the last day or two, it remains my desert island movie. But if you hear me express some passionate opinions today, both positive and negative, just know that it comes from a place of love. Also, this is not going to be a video for newcomers to the film. I'll just say I love the movie. If you have not seen it, I recommend you check it out. But we're gonna assume that everybody has more or less a working knowledge of the movie and has at least seen one version of the movie, perhaps more. Like I said before, 3 versions are included on this Blu-ray, which is where our conversation will begin. But before we go any further, Mr. Lambert, how the hell are you? Who the hell are you? And is there anything you'd like to plug or promote before we discuss this collection?
I'm doing great. Happy birthday. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, David Lambert Art. I post almost exclusively about Old West history, Western movies, Western pop culture, how they, I go pretty in depth. And so anyone who likes Westerns,
pretty in depth is the understatement of the 21st century.
Well, anyone who likes Westerns, check out my Twitter, and you might find something to enjoy. And then David Lambert Art under people who see my artwork on Patreon, Instagram, Facebook. So,
and I'll include a link to your Patreon down in the description below. But I'll just say that for people who admire both loving portraits of people like Harry Dean Stanton or Warren Oates or whatever the case may be, as well as astonishingly beautiful women, then you will be delighted and surprised and enthralled by the illustrations done by the great David Lambert.
Yeah, wrinkly, crusty old men and beautiful women.
Absolutely.
My 2 specialties.
Yeah, I think Sam Peckinpah would approve. Also, shout out to your recent episode you did with the Pink Smoke about cattle drives. If you just go to pinksmoke.com, you will find, I think it's a 4-hour podcast about the subject where you tackle movies like Red River and Covered Wagon and so on and so forth. But anyway, you and I have been tackling Westerns for a long time. And the way we first met one another, I think you were just like looking around the internet for anybody who had discussed Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid at one point. And I'd done one podcast with my high school roommate where I basically dragged him into my apartment, made him watch the movie for the first time. And then we recorded a podcast, which wasn't a completely satisfying experience because you need a dance partner who is equally eager or well-versed. And then you and I, a few years later, did an episode of Wrong Reel 436 called The Many Lives of Billy the Kid, which I'll also link down in the description below, where we tackled a whole shitload of movies dealing with the story of Billy the Kid, but we didn't necessarily do the complete deep dive on Peckinpah's film. But here we are today. We got no distractions, no other movies in our way. We're going to be diving into Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. So let's just start with the easiest question on my to-do list. There are 3 versions of the movie on this Blu-ray. Which version is your favorite? And do you have a favorite version which may or may not be missing from this collection?
Yeah, so the first version of this movie I saw was 25 years ago, and it was on a VHS. It was the theatrical cut. And I liked it even in that version. It really coincided with me getting into Westerns. I'd already seen The Wild Bunch and a few other things, but there was just something weird about it. Something that just it was different, which we can get into. And then later I saw the Turner cut, quote unquote Turner cut, which was released by Turner in the mid '80s on Z Channel and video after Peckinpah had already died, and that cut of the film was Peckinpah's first preview cut. And so Peckinpah was able to do two preview cuts before the movie was taken away from him. And so the Turner, it has been my preferred version for a long time. The cuts that they include on this disc, and we'll get into the Cedar stuff, but just the ones that are actually of historical value, because I don't think either Cedar cut has historical value.
I completely, totally agree.
Yeah. But so the second preview was the one that was the last overseen by Peckinpah. It was the one that was smuggled out of MGM by his friend Chalo Gonzalez. And a few years ago, Literary Film Fan is his name on Twitter, I believe. Sent me a copy of that was basically taken from Peckinpah's own private VHS dub of the print that had been stolen. And I know I sent it to you. I was sending it to everyone just because, and it was just very bad quality. But I always found it like an interesting. It's always interesting to see any version of the film, and that was the one that Peckinpah would go and show around. That's the second preview. That's the one that's included on this new Criterion disc.
Yeah, in 2K, because it doesn't have enough resolution to be on. Like, if you look at the box set, one half of it is the 4K, which is the theatrical cut, and the 50th anniversary cut, overseen by Cedar and Roger Spottiswoode. And then if you look on like the regular Blu-rays, you've got the 50th anniversary, the theatrical cut, as well as the final preview version. So anyway, it's 4 discs, and you can kind of get lost trying to find the version that you want to see.
Yeah, so the Turner has always been my preferred cut. It is. I don't know if we want to get into the differences between all the versions.
We will in a sec, but I just want to say first and foremost, I had a moment 2 nights ago where I stayed up until about 6 or 6:30 in the morning, which I rarely do, and what I can only describe as like a state of blind rage. Because before I started watching the box set, I was already kind of writing my intro about how it's so easy to get cynical about the state of film culture, and it's so easy to talk about how, nothing's going to last forever. But here we are, like, finally, like this like great masterpiece is going to be rediscovered by a new generation. But as I started looking through the collection and I couldn't find the 1988 Turner preview cut that I wanted to see, I think I went temporarily insane. I went completely fucking psycho. And then the only way I could deal with my rage was by whipping out my old DVDs from back in the day, which had the 2005 Cedar cut, which I hate, as well as the 1988 Turner preview cut. So I had to figure out, in my state of rage and with my technological inexpertise, how to rip a DVD and save it to Vimeo so that I could at least feel like it was being preserved some way, somehow. And so all the clips we'll be sharing today come from the 2005 DVD of the Turner cut, but apparently now the materials for that cut are so decomposed they can't even do a proper Blu-ray release of it. And so I got very sad, very mad, but then I got overcame, or kind of I guess I finally remembered I'm a mature old man, don't have such a temper tantrum, and I was willing to watch all 3 cuts and calm down just a bit. But once again, that 1988 cut is the version which I've seen over and over and over again. I had it on fucking Laserdisc in the late 90s, and like you, that is the cut that I will always prefer.
Yeah, I've heard that it was too degraded. I've also heard that Criterion wasn't given access to it in some capacity. I'm not sure what that even means. I know a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years now, and so who knows what's happened in that time. I went to a screening at the Egyptian in LA, in Hollywood, and it was a double feature of Pat Garrett and McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Nice, that's a good evening at the movies.
Yeah, 2 of my favorite films, the 2 best 70s westerns, easily. Okay. Sorry, Outlaw Josie Wells, you're not even close to these 2 films.
I would be inclined to agree. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of any 70s westerns that I might like more than those 2, but nothing immediately comes to mind.
There's nothing. There's not even I could definitively say there's not a 70s western as good as McCabe Mrs. Miller or Pat Garrett Billy the Kid. I'm willing to go on record, but and the quality of that print was really good. I was surprised of both prints. So I guess I don't know. I don't know what's happened to it in the time since. It's one of those things, and I guess it's par for the course for this film in particular, is that there's always going to be a certain level of dissatisfaction. It's never been completed. It's never been truly finished. And so it sucks, but it feels almost appropriate that my preferred version would not be on what is otherwise a great box set, which I have to thank you for sending it my way. I appreciate that.
I mean, at least the final preview version, while the color's a little funky, it's pretty goddamn close to the version I love, but it does have a few little lines and beats that are missing, and also has a few scenes that the Turner cut does not have. And so it's almost like a Frankenstein's monster, where once you're a fan of the movie and you've digested all the different versions, you're like, oh, well, I kind of like the way this version does this scene. I like the way this version does this scene. And so I almost feel like everybody in their mind has their perfect fan edit, but I don't need to do a fan edit. My favorite version is the version that I saw over and over and over again. And when I watch the theatrical cut and when I watch the new, I guess 50th anniversary cut, I like visibly flinch and recoil each time there's a different music cue or a scene is cut short. There's so many great dialogue scenes that are cut short in the new version. And what really kills me is basically once you get past the first 10 minutes, I can live with the new cut. I'm more or less fine with it. But losing the framing device, losing the opening credit sequence, and putting back in the doo-doo brown 70s shitty opening credit sequence of the theatrical cut into the 50th anniversary, for me, makes the 50th anniversary cut unwatchable. And I was watching the documentary, the special features first, before I started watching the different cuts. I was like, why is this documentarian, why do they keep using clips from the theatrical cut? I was like, the theatrical cut fucking sucks. And I was like freaking out. And then I realized when I started watching the 50th anniversary cut, oh, he's pulling what is the new definitive cut. But I'm sorry, all respect to Roger Spottiswoode, all respect to Paul Sidor. I've got one of his books right here, which I lovingly read back in college. And even then I disagreed with a lot of things he had to say about the movie. All respect to them. I feel like this new 50th anniversary cut in a lot of ways is an attempt to make Paul Sidor's, his own fan edit, the official version. I'm like, no, sorry, fuck you. You're not Sam Peckinpah. The official, I guess a definitive version should always be a version that Sam Peckinpah had his hands on. Even if it's unfinished, I want the Sam Peckinpah cut, not the Paul Sidor cut. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on Paul Sidor and Roger Spottiswoode trying to reconcile the differences between the theatrical cut and Sidor's 2005 cut, which once again, I can't even get through the first 5 minutes because of the way he handles the intro.
I like Paul Sidor a lot. I've met him a few times, talked to him a few times. I think he's one of the best Peckinpah scholars out there. His book about Pat Garrett, Billy the Kid, is one of my favorite film books, period.
That's like 2015 when that came out, or 16. I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head, but it has a really cool, elaborate title.
Yeah, it's like the authentic death and contentious afterlife of Pat Garrett, Billy the Kid, something to that effect.
Yeah, here that's exactly it. The authentic death and contentious afterlife of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, which is a fantastic title.
Yes, yeah, and an homage to the authentic death of Henry Jones, which in many ways is where
read because of you.
Yes,
you got me to read.
Which became One Eye Jacks. Peckinpah had done a draft of it, and that all changed. But that is really the genesis of Peckinpah's, at least, affinity for the Billy the Kid legend, and really a huge influence on what Peckinpah would do in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. And like I've said before, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is honestly a closer adaptation of the authentic death of Henry Jones than One Eye Jacks, which is the official adaptation. And Peckinpah and Charles Needham, the author of that, stayed friends, throughout their lives. But
did Rudy Wurlitzer use the book as a jumping off point, or how did he approach it?
Rudy Wurlitzer was already he had already written his version, and it had a lot of overlap with the authentic death of Henry Jones. And Peckinpah loved his script. It was very different, and it was really more appropriate for a Monty Hellman kind of Western, which is who Rudy Wurlitzer wrote it for. You know, he'd obviously written Two Lane Blacktop.
Oh yeah, and also, but obviously Monty Hellman had also done Ride the Whirlwind and The Shooting with Jack Nicholson like a few years prior, and pretty goddamn good director of westerns. But I like Two Lane Blacktop more than his westerns.
Yes, yeah, and that was written by Rudy Wurlitzer, and so Wurlitzer's early script was more focused on Billy the Kid. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid didn't meet, and it was a lot about Billy's decline, which mirrors what happens in The Authentic Death of Henry Jones. But Wurlitzer had not read The Authentic Death of Henry Jones until Peckinpah, who like I said, loved the script, but when he reread it, realized that at least for the type of dramatist that he was, it was not going to work as a director, and so he called for rewrites, and he kind of helped shape and develop it. But he insisted that Wurlitzer either read the book or look at his old screenplay adaptation of the book to get a little bit of shaping the drama. You know,
it still blows my mind that we nearly had a movie directed by Kubrick, written by Peckinpah. It didn't happen, but it came close to happening through One-Eyed Jacks. But I feel like that's one of the great unmade movies. A script by Peckinpah, directed by Kubrick. It would have. I don't know if I would have survived the experience.
Yeah, who knows? But I think, like I said on our One-Eyed Jacks episode, they're such different artists that I don't know if it would have ever. If their sensibilities would have ever really matched it,
and just thrown it over his shoulder and be like, yeah, fuck that, we're starting over.
yeah. So Kubrick has a certain level of detachment that I don't think Peckinpah does. Peckinpah he lives that shit. You know, he lives his characters, he lives his movies, for better or worse. Yeah, I guess this is every conversation I have on this movie, I get lost. I don't even know where I started.
It's one of those movies where, because for 50 years, the trials and tribulations of the shooting and the release and the multiple versions, that story has taken on a life of its own, to the point where I think the movie is amazing and it's one of my all-time favorite movies. But sometimes I feel like from film history nuts, if a movie's had to struggle through multiple iterations throughout the various stages of its development and its filming and its release, it makes the fans that much more invested, because there's so much history to discuss and debate, in addition to all the incredibly rich thematic material and all the wonderful filmmaking and that sort of thing. I feel like that's why a lot of fans of Orson Welles get so preoccupied with movies like The Magnificent Ambersons or Touch of Evil. And it just makes people so much more invested and so much more willing to kind of pick up arms and defend the movie. So it's one of those things where if somebody out there says, go to hell, Paul Sedor's versions are the versions that I first saw, and I love those versions, you're being a dick, fine. Fair play, but I would just encourage people to go back and watch the other versions, of the preview versions as well. And if anybody wants to reach out to me on Twitter and get a password protected link to the second disc on this collection, I will gladly do so, as long as you promise to keep it a secret, at least a secret, unless they are a diehard Peckinpah fanatic. Because I just want people to be able to do the compare and contrast. But what I finally came to terms with, the final preview version included on the box set, it's close enough to the version that I love, even if the color's a little funky, where I can live with that. I just want to encourage people, if you've never seen the movie, start with the final preview version, because for me, the framing device and the opening credits of that version, it sets the tone, it sets the style, it sets the rhythm. This is not a fast-paced Western. It's a slow-moving, elegiac, haunting, melancholy adaptation or story of Billy the Kid. And speaking of melancholy, I'm going to play my first clip, because otherwise we'll never get to all the clips I want to play. But when speaking of the word melancholy, the great Jocelyn Robards, who was also in the Ballad of Cable Hogue, has some comments that I feel like give us an insight into the fascination I have with this movie.
I do hope you enjoy these rainy New Mexican evenings. They have a fabulous melancholy to them. They bring us closer to some greater design. At least I hope so.
And it's a very brief clip, and it might seem like a non sequitur, but there is a sense of melancholy at the core of this movie. And as you and I have discussed many times before, Peckinpah made a lot of movies about a golden age coming to an end. and it's in Convoy, it's in The Wild Bunch, it's in a lot of his movies. But in this movie, you feel it the most, where with the passing or killing of each individual character, you do truly feel like something special is going out of this world. And we just have so many incredible scenes, like with L.Q. Jones telling James Coburn, like, we ought not to be doing this to each other. Like, there's not a lot of us left. That sense of loss is incredible, and it permeates the whole film. And I feel like that opening scene where you're seeing Pat Garrett being murdered in the early 1900s, cutting back and forth with Billy and his buddies shooting chickens, it just lets you know what movie you're about to see. It kind of almost trains you to watch the movie that's coming. Whereas, once again, the Paul Sedor version and the theatrical version, it cuts out all that. And the title sequence to the theatrical cut and the 50th anniversary cut, I don't know about you, I think it looks like complete and utter diarrhea. If you've been living off of vomit and puke and shit for a month, and then you finally decide about diarrhea attack, it would look like that title sequence. But am I being too harsh? Why is that title sequence included in the 50th anniversary version? It's horrible.
I honestly don't know. Okay. I was talking about Cedar. That's where I got kind of a little off track, but I guess we can tackle this part. So the framing device of Garrett being killed at the beginning of the film, intercut with Billy the Kid. Garrett being killed in the title card says 1909. It was actually in 1908. Even in the second preview cut, it says 1908, 1909 at the beginning, and then at the end with that weird end crawl, which we'll get into too, it says 1909. So it gives you an idea that this was a movie that was not finished in any form. The last version that Peckinpah touched has glaring mistakes that you wanted to correct, and I think they do correct that in this newer 50th anniversary version. But so that framing device was gone. So they had to create a new credit sequence, which I think was created by Roger Spottiswoode. Or Spotswood. I don't know how to say that guy's name.
Yeah, I've been calling him Spottiswoode for years. Maybe it's just Spotswood. My grandfather's name was Spotswood, but he spelled it just S-P-O-T-S and run to the character in Team America. The name is Spotswood. But anyway, Roger Spotswood, great editor. Also, even directed a Bond movie at one point. He's had a huge career. So once again, all respect to a legend who's done amazing work. But the sepia toned photographs that he's kind of zooming in and out of, or at least like they're still frames from the movie, it looks like something that I could do an iMovie like in 5 minutes. It is grotesque. I think it's vulgar.
I was thinking about it the other day, and it reminds me, I think there's on certain editing programs, there's a Ken Burns thing or whatever, where we'll kind of do a Ken Burns.
I use it all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it feels like. To me, it feels obviously cobbled together. We need a credit sequence. Let's take some frames from the film and just kind of, but for whatever reason, Paul Sedor seems to think this is a great
My theory that Paul Sedor saw the theatrical cut so many times. It's kind of like when you hear Guillermo del Toro saying that his favorite version of Blade Runner is the theatrical cut with the voiceover narration, because that's the version he saw a million times before he saw the director's cut without the voiceover. And he says he can't watch it without the voiceover. I suspect the same way I'm attached to the 1988 Turner preview version, Sedor is attached to the theatrical cut, because that was his first exposure, which he probably had seen 100 times before he ever saw the preview cut later on. So he, in his imagination, his fan edit, that is the version of Pat Garrett.
Yeah. And then when he was able to see all these extra scenes before the Turner got any kind of release, he saw them in isolation and was like, these are necessary scenes. But when he actually saw them play, in his own mind, he felt that a lot of them didn't play as well. A lot of the scenes, he said that the scenes that the two versions share between the Turner and the theatrical is superior in the scenes that they share. I don't agree with that. Maybe in little bits here and there, but not overall.
I feel like I agree. Any loyalty to the theatrical cut is like a weird 50-year victory for Jim Aubrey, who was running MGM at the time, aka the Smiling Cobra, a man who's been described as a total sociopath. But one of the reasons this movie suffered from so many problems in terms of the budget, the accelerated shoot, the accelerated release, Jim Aubrey was MGM was in debt from their casino operations. He needed cash and he needed cash fast. And he needed this movie to be a getaway style success like Peckinpah had just cranked out. And so that sense of urgency from Jim Aubrey is what led to so many problems initially on the movie, which here we are in 2024, and we're still suffering the consequences of Jim Aubrey's meddling. And so I feel like just for the sake of giving Peckinpah one final fuck you to Jim Aubrey, we should adhere to his interpretation, his cuts, his preview versions.
Yeah. And so like I said, I really appreciate, respect, and in many ways admire Paul Sedor's work and everything. And I can't necessarily blame him for taking the opportunity to do his own version of the movie or whatever, just kind of as a fun exercise, right? Unfortunately, when Warner Brothers released that version, which he was had to basically cut within a couple hours, like that first 2005 version was something he did like in an afternoon.
And if it had been disc 2 instead of disc 1, I would have had no problems with it. But what compounds the problem, when you look up the movie on streaming services, it's always that shitty 2005 cut. And when I bump into people who've said they've seen it for the first time on Amazon, and that's the version that they've seen, it breaks my fucking heart. Like, I'm like, here we are like decades later, and we're still losing this battle of having the right versions of the movie be seen. And so I'm trying not to get too overly emotional about this, but once again, that sense of melancholy referred to by Jason Robards, it's hard not to feel a deep sense of melancholy when you see a well-intentioned like 20-year-old just through lack of knowledge watching quote unquote the wrong versions first.
Yeah, and let me say this too, because I do have obviously a hierarchy of the versions I prefer.
All right, give us the ranking of every version from worst to best according to David Lambert.
I'd say my favorite is the first preview, the Turner. Then it would be probably the second preview. Then it would be this newer Sedor cut, this 50th anniversary one. And then it would be the 2005 Sedor cut, and then it would be the theatrical.
I co-sign all the above, and I'm not saying that just to blow smoke up your ass, but that's the best ranking by far.
Yeah, and so, Sedor, when he did that, according to his own word, he always he tried to make it a point that he did not want this to replace the Turner. You know what I mean? And of course it did. They didn't restore it properly on that disc. This became the default. This is the one that's available on streaming, And watching his version that he's done recently with Roger Spottiswoode, it's definitely a refined version of that. It's a lot better than that first one. You can see that he's had a little more time to smooth things over. It has a lot less of the weird errors, like audio errors. When like R.G. Armstrong is talking, if you watch that 2005, his mouth isn't moving with his words and everything in some of the scenes. So it's definitely a refined version of it. As for Roger Spottiswood's involvement, Spotswood. If I don't know what his involvement in this other one is. I honestly, my guess would be that I think Sedor got so much shit from Peckinpah diehards like us for his version. I went to a screening of his version one time, and I got at the end, some guy like, "What? That's the worst thing I ever saw!" Like he was yelling at Paul Sedor.
Yeah, I would have spit on the floor in disgust and walked out.
Yeah. So, and the weakest part of his Pat Garrett book is a section where he kind of has to defend his choices, and so
it's like Lucas having to defend the special editions and the prequels and that sort of thing. But like with Lucas, I get fucking furious when you cannot see Star Wars from 1977. Like if it was just available and I could watch Star Wars, I could relax. But it's like because it's been deliberately and like willfully taken away from us and like locked away. I'm like, all right, well now you've like declared war, and the same thing holds true here. Just keep the other version in circulation, and then we can all coexist peacefully. But I tried to keep an open mind while watching the 50th anniversary version, and I was keeping notes on different changes. I'll give it one piece of praise. how it differs from the 50th anniversary version, how it differs from all right, between the version that I like from 1988, the Turner version, and the theatrical cut and the 50th anniversary version. When Pat Garrett is finished getting a bath and getting a deputy and that sort of thing in town, and he's about to go visit his wife, there's two different ways that he approaches the house. And in the version that I know and love from 1988, when he approaches the house, there's all this reluctance, and he's almost like having to will himself to enter the house, and he kind of pushes open the fence as the music swells. Then the movie cuts to Billy, and that's the version that I've always liked. But then if you watch the theatrical cut, as he approaches the house, it's a different take from as he enters the house with less reluctance. In the 50th anniversary version, they've brought back the version from 1988 where he kind of reluctantly pushes open the gate before walking in. I'm like, all right, at least you took a shot from the version that I like and put it back in. Whether or not we need the scene with the wife, I would like to see that scene as here's an extra scene, like in isolation. I don't necessarily need it in the movie, although I do love the bit where she says how her relatives would no longer talk to her, because that's when you start to get an idea of how much Pat Garrett has sold out, how much he's sold up by going to work for Chisholm, but getting a badge and that sort of thing. The fact that his wife's relatives now think of him as a gringo, I was like, it tells you all you need to know about how certain people in the community are starting to look at him. So the scene is good, but I went years and years and years without ever seeing that scene, and so I don't necessarily need the scene. But your opinions might differ.
Yeah, I mean, I like that scene, and between the two cuts, between Peckinpah's two cuts, between the two legitimate cuts, in the Turner,
sorry, I misspoke earlier. It's the second preview, or the final preview version, that has a different approach to the house. It has the same approach from the theatrical cut. I like the earlier preview when it comes to his approach to the house. Sorry, but I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. He kind of is at the white picket fence, and he's reluctantly going to go inside, and that mirrors later when he has to kill the kid. There's also another white picket fence, and so you have that. And so in that first preview that lacks the wife scene, it has that, so where you understand even as simply as that image, his reluctance to go back to this life of domesticity, which he's supposedly doing this all for. You know what I mean? He's trying to become a legit
he wants to live to be old and gray.
Yeah. But then when he actually goes, to try, he hates it. He and in the second preview, it has the wife scene, but it doesn't have that reluctance. I don't think it has the white picket fence.
Yeah, he looks at the house and he's walking toward it, but the white picket fence gesture is missing. And so that's one of the few flaws in the final preview version. And another problem with the final preview version is one of my favorite scenes, which I actually have the clip here. But when Gene Evans, there's a great scene where Billy shows up with this family of Irish people where everybody's got these carrot top hairdos, and Alamosa Bill is there, who's been deputized, and inevitably they're going to have to throw down. And as soon as basically Alamosa Bill says, all right, well, I better get to it, there's this great bit where Gene Evans says, I just finished putting up that new door. And it shows how fatalistic this whole world is, and how even if once you build a new door, like he just finished using that door for his son's coffin. But here is the scene that is missing from the final version of the movie, or the final preview version of the movie.
Well, we best get to it. Just got through putting up that new cottonwood door. Used the old one for my son, John. Got into a shooting with Olin Carroll. He'd buried out yonder there.
And that's the short version just for YouTube. But he goes on to say, he was a good hand, but he couldn't shoot, though. But it's a great little scene. But once again, just remind you how, as Peckinpah frequently says, his movies are about loners with an incipient need to kill. I think that's the line that he has often said. Or no, he says, the loner is an incipient need for violence. But it just shows how violence is all around these guys, and people are dying left and right. But it blows my mind that the final preview version would not include that full scene, especially when Gene Evans is such a legend who worked on those great Sam Fuller movies and that sort of thing. And so the final preview version is really good, but it's missing some stuff that I like.
Okay, wait. So look, I've been drinking all weekend, watching all these different cuts. So I'm gonna give you in the second preview. Is that Gene Evans? There's some parts of that scene that have been cut down. I don't even remember.
So when Alamosa
Bill, there's a few lines of dialogue.
Yeah. So when
Or
Alamosa Bill says, I guess we better get down to it, you missed the entire bit. The whole line about I just finished putting up the new door, that's all gone. And it just cuts to them outside. And I was like, no.
yeah, that's terrible because you see in the background where he like tells his kids like to get some tools and take the door off, and you see him taking
Yeah.
the door outside for the guy who's gonna die.
And they're
Just to
so
jump back,
casual and everyday about it. Like it's just no big deal.
yeah, just to go back to the Garrett White scene. I like that scene. I like having it, and I think between the two preview cuts, since in the first it has the picket fence, and in the second it doesn't, it feels that Peckinpah thought it was one or the other. You either need that kind of suggestion at the fence, or you need the whole scene itself. And one of the things that I would credit the Seedor's cut is that he includes both. He includes the scene with his wife and that reluctance at the picket fence. I personally, and this is like, this is my own thing. Not that I'd ever go in and do a cut of the movie myself. I like the Garrett wife scene. I feel some of it could be cut down. I don't need her to tell him he's dead inside and stuff like that. That feels a little on the nose.
Well, it's just redundant. The whole movie is about Pat Garrett being dead inside. We know.
Yeah. So I appreciate the stuff about him being a gringo and everything, and I like having that scene. Just as contrast between Garrett and Billy in terms of Billy making love and how sweet and erotic it is at the end, and how
even the way he slips under the covers and says it's cold. I love the way he says it's cold as he's getting into bed with her. But we all know that feeling when it's cold and you cuddle to get warm, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. I don't know that feeling. One day, maybe. one day I'll
nothing better than two naked bodies covered in goosebumps trying to stay warm through shared body heat.
But like you said, and like the movie never necessarily needed that scene. But just to jump back to the Seedor stuff, and I honestly feel, I don't know if you listened to the audio commentary on the new version.
I have not. I watched the 3 versions, but that's all I had time for.
So it's like Seedor and then a critic. I don't remember the guy's name. Sorry. And then Roger Spotswood, and they'll ask Roger Spotswood questions, and he'll just be like, later. I don't remember. He honestly. He has some good stories here and there.
90 now. I mean, he was a working professional more than 50 years ago. Like, how old is he at this point? I was amazed to hear that he was still alive.
Yeah, and so I don't, I don't want to attack Paul Seedor or anything, but I almost feel he got so much shit that he's trotting out like this Peckinpah editor. Probably the most famous Peckinpah's editors, just because he later became a director in his own right. Almost as like legitimacy, like, hey, everyone, it's not just me. I've got this, this friend and collaborator of Peckinpah's who helped shape a lot of his best movies. He approves. I honestly feel that's what it is, and whatever. This is speculation. I, in my mind, do not feel that Roger Spotswood came in and really worked on this new version of the film.
I would counter Seedor and say, while Spotswood might have been the legitimate editor on the film, that's the same way we have a little bit of contempt for Robert Wise for recutting The Magnificent Ambersons. And Robert Wise will say, oh, well, I didn't butcher the movie. I didn't destroy the movie because here it is, a beloved movie all these years later. And it's like, yeah, but you chose to take sides with RKO over Orson Welles, which is why some people have a bone to pick with Robert Wise, in spite of the fact that he made a lot of movies and edited fucking Citizen Kane. Like Robert Wise, he's a legend, but he does have a black mark next to his name for helping butcher The Magnificent Ambersons. And you could probably make a similar argument to Spotswood. It's like, at what point is your loyalty to Sam more important to your loyalty to MGM? And obviously we all have to eat, we all have to pay the bills. And what's amazing is how all these choices of loyalty and principle and sticking to your guns that we have seen in real life surrounding the making of this movie are so eerily reflected throughout the movie over and over and over again. I think that's what keeps film historians coming back over and over again, because there's a great line by Slim Pickens, which I'm going to play right now, which kind of sums up the whole attitude of, Are you with us or against us? Are you with the suits? Are you with Billy the Kid? And so here's the great Slim Pickens.
I understand you've been riding for Chisholm. I'd rather be on the outside of the law than packing a badge for that town of Lincoln and them that are running it.
And I feel like there's so many scenes like this throughout the movie where it's like, is Sam Peckinpah like using these scenes to shoot bullets at all the execs and producers that he hates working with? And I don't want to completely defend Peckinpah because he was a raging alcoholic and he liked to pick fights because it helped him get his, I don't know, like kind of get tuned up for fight. He needed to have constant fights just to kind of wake up and get his day started. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like when James Coburn is trying to kind of sharpen up before fighting Billy the Kid. And he does so by abusing and humiliating and killing some guys that just stumble into this store. And I feel like Peckinpah needed adversarial relationships to kind of get out of bed in the morning. But it is fascinating just seeing how these ideas of principle and loyalty or selling out for comfort versus freedom, they're all in the movie and they're all surrounded with the making of the movie. And that, once again, that makes the movie so endlessly fascinating to study after year after year after year.
Yeah. And also to defend the editors who worked on the film, it was taken away from Peckinpah. There was no way that he was ever going to be able to, later on when there were different studio heads and everything, they offered Peckinpah the ability to come in and do his own cut, and he didn't do it. He was already working on other stuff, and a lot of times he might have appreciated having a mangled masterpiece as opposed to actually putting the energy into what was necessary to fully make it that vision. And if he ever even got everything he needed to really make a film on the level of a Wild Bunch or something.
Yeah, it's easier to have the grievance. They see, look what they did to my movie, as opposed to having total freedom and then possibly having to face the rejection if the movie's not as good as everybody would hope.
Yeah, and then so Peckinpah's editors, even though he was no longer involved in the process, I feel that they were trying to salvage the movie under the conditions that they had. Had they not prepared this theatrical cut, which has terrible things in it that Jim Aubrey demanded, like the freeze from them smiling at the end and that shit, But other than things like that, I understand that these editors were trying to salvage the movie as much as they can under those conditions, and so I wouldn't want to portray them as like these studio stooges who are just doing it. I think they were trying to salvage a movie that Peckinpah by that point was kicked off of and in some ways abandoned.
Totally.
So
it would not be the first time Peckinpah abandoned one of his children.
Yeah. So I would never criticize them for what they tried to do.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing their character. I'm just criticizing the fact that, like in the 50th anniversary version, right as Coburn's about to walk in to face Billy, how they don't include the entire scene of Sam Peckinpah. And I wanted to include that clip here, but there's music playing throughout it, so YouTube will freak out. But I like having the full scene of Peckinpah. And that full version is in the final preview version. So at least that scene survives. But the theatrical cut and the 50th anniversary cut both condense Peckinpah's exchange with Coburn. And I've always loved that scene because I like Sam Peckinpah, who's a great natural character. And I love just seeing the way he waves off and declines having a drink with Pat Garrett because he's got contempt for Pat Garrett.
Yeah. My biggest issue, it's difficult because this second preview cut, I would, that ending crawl. Maybe we should tackle that.
All right, so you were the one who first made me even aware of that crawl because I'd been watching the 1988 Turner cut for decades before you even made me aware of that. So tell people what they will see at the end and why it's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, so in both of Peckinpah's preview cuts, after Garrett leaves, the kids throwing rocks at him and everything.
I thought I was throwing shit at him. I always thought he was throwing like horse manure at him.
Oh, is he? I don't. Oh, okay.
I thought he was picking up horse droppings and chucking them. Maybe it's
Okay,
rock.
well,
Yeah.
Either
In
one.
my head canon, in my fan edit, he's throwing shit at him to show some complete contempt.
Yeah, that's pretty contemptuous. But then it goes back to the framing device of Garrett getting killed. But in the second preview, it has this crawl, and I don't have the full text, but it says just kind of this very weird thing where it's like, this has not been a story about two gunfighters from 100 years ago. This is and it starts getting into stuff about the Santa Fe ring and Albert Fall, and this murder that Pat Garrett was investigating later in his life, and then he was murdered, and there are people that have sort of conspiracies around it. And Peckinpah seemed to buy into this conspiracy that the same people who essentially hired Garrett to kill the kid are the ones that ended up killing him. And then Albert Fall, eventually he defended the murderers of Pat Garrett in court, later became part of Warren G. Harding's cabinet. He was very much involved in the Teapot Dome scandal. Paul Thomas Anderson claims that he's the guy who, in his testimony for the Teapot Dome scandal, is the first one to say, "I drink your milkshake."
Oh, nice.
If you actually look at the actual court documents and everything, there's nothing in there. So I don't know if he's misremembering or what, but
it's a great line all the same.
Yeah. So it has this whole thing about the corruption and everything, and it sort of ties it into maybe what was going on in American politics at the time with Nixon and Watergate and all that. And then it says, "So what else is new?" And it's signed SP.
Yeah.
And this is something that
like the novel Dracula, when Dracula writes a letter that's signed at the end, just D.
Yes. So it's very much a Peckinpah gesture, and very much does tell you where his where his mind and his views and everything is at. But it's so tonally wrong for the film. It's so reductive. It's not. I mean, just on a historical level, it's absurd.
And it's also just the director too deliberately showing his hand. You've just had a 2-hour awe-inspiring experience to get your message across. The message is in the movie. You don't need the letter at the end.
Yeah, and it's something that just no other Peckinpah film really has anything like that. Maybe some of his later, incomprehensible cocaine fuel stuff like the Austrian Weekend. You can see something like that, right?
It fucking rules.
It's like you don't end Shane. What I mean, and it's already so it's not obvious, but it's already there in the film. It's in the.
If you have to explain your movie at the end of the movie, well, then you've done a bad job as a filmmaker. Yeah,
and so it is Peckinpah's last cut, so you have to resist being like, well, that's dumb. Get that out of there. You know what I mean? A lot of Peckinpah people, like I believe this, and I think Paul Cedar believes this too. I think that some people theorize that Peckinpah was trying to put something so obvious, so wrong, that would draw attention of the studio and say, cut that scene, that you cannot put that. And
basically picking a fight in one area where you're intending to cut it anyway, so that you can throw them a bone. Like screenwriters do that all the time. They'll put shit in their scripts that they plan on cutting anyway, so that when they get notes from a development exec, like, oh, this scene's kind of terrible, it makes the development exec feel like they're contributing, but it's a game that a lot of filmmakers and screenwriters will play.
Yeah, and so I don't really think. Obviously Peckinpah's drunk and crazy. I mean, he was somewhat out of his mind, and so perhaps in the moment he did feel that was like the best, most legitimate thing to do in the film. I don't know, but for me, I go, there's nothing else in his filmography that really has anything that egregious, especially on a movie like this. So it's hard for me to square that with his artistry in other places. It's just like, I guess Paul Cedar wanted to do his own. Everyone wants to do their own cut of this movie.
You shared with me a really good fan edit that's available on Internet Archive. And so once again, it's like, I feel like if you are a fanatic, sooner or later, you're going to watch all five cuts of the film? What is theatrical, 88, 2005, there's the final preview, and there's the 50th. Yeah, so the 5 cuts, 50th anniversary. Yeah. If you're a true fan, you're going to watch all 5 cuts, and you're going to debate the pros and cons of all the above, just knowing that there's probably never going to be the best like an official version. But once again, if all the other versions, if I had to pick one to survive until the end of time, it would be the 1988 Turner preview cut, which I could totally live with, even if it is missing like the scene with Ruthie. I do like the scene with Ruthie, and which is included in the final preview cut on the Blu-ray. And maybe it's redundant. Maybe you don't need that extra bit with Pat Garrett slapping a hooker around and her telling him, you need to go to Fort Sumner to find Billy. But I do like that scene. And so there's pros and cons to every single version of the movie. But maybe now at this point, we've been going about an hour, we can just actually start talking about the movie and some of the stuff we really like about it.
Oh yeah. Well, let me just mention just about that end crawl. I find it so egregious and such a bad way to end the film. And like I was saying earlier, it's like you don't end Shane after he rides off with a crawl about the Johnson County War and the corruption there. It's just such a terrible note. And so watching all these versions, it's like I find that so bad that it really, I'm like, it lowers the film almost to that same level of this new 50th anniversary edition, which is in many ways it's smoothed over and anything, but I find that such a black eye that it's like I want a version of it without that. And it sucks that the version without that is not included theatrical, which is not anyone whatever, but it sucks that now the only version on the set that doesn't have Pat Garrett ability to get smiling at the end in a freeze frame, or has this end crawl is this 50th anniversary edition that Peckinpah has nothing to do with. It sucks. It really does, and it's a great
also,
set.
For a lot of Criterion diehards, they're just going to say, "Well, Criterion's the final word on every film discussion, and that they can do no wrong." It's kind of like people who defend A24, whether the movies are good or bad, they will fight to the death defending every film that A24 makes. And I love that kind of loyalty and fanaticism, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if similar debates are raging in other corners of the internet, like on Blu-ray forums and on Reddit and that sort of thing, people debating the pros and cons. And who knows, maybe a few, like as Paul Verhoeven used to say, a little war, it's not so bad. Maybe a little war is not so bad when it comes to keeping the conversation and discussions of the movie alive, because if there's no discourse surrounding a movie, it fades into the ashes of time. But when I saw you tweeting about how it just makes you sad that your favorite version of the movie is not on the set, I was like, yeah, that's the perfect way to say it. It just makes me sad that my favorite version of the movie is not on this definitive set, which will probably define the movie for the next couple of decades. And so I guess nothing lasts forever, including our favorite version of the movie.
Yeah, and I don't want to attack Criterion because I guess whatever limited access they had and everything, and I wouldn't, and if I'm gonna not find the Cedar version legitimate, I can't expect Criterion to come in and cut that scene out because I personally don't like it, that version. So I don't know. I mean, honestly, that and it's also an illegitimate version, but that fan edit I sent you is, it is essentially that first preview cut with the Garrett wife scene reinstated.
I didn't go through the fine-tooth comb. Is the quality of that version good enough where you would be happy with me including a link to it down in the description below for people to watch, or would you not send them there first?
No, I would send them there because I believe I think that it's taken from that DVD that the DVD that you put on the
one
DVD
that I was
version.
so paranoid that one day my DVD might get scratched and I wouldn't be able to play it anymore, that I had to have 2 copies of it just in case there's a zombie apocalypse. It's like, well, I need to still be able to watch Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid no matter what happens. So now I feel comfortable and secure that I will always be able to watch the version that I like.
Yeah, and so like the 50th anniversary edition, it has stuff that that I do prefer to either preview version in certain cases here and there.
And the
But
color looks gorgeous. I mean, the restoration, I've never seen the color so vibrant. I've never seen them so just like eye-popping. That's one of the big flaws of the final preview version. It's like you can tell that print has got a little vinegar syndrome going on. You're like, yeah, it's starting to, it's a little, I don't mind a few scratches or a few cigarette burns and that sort of thing, give it a little texture, a little character, but the color does feel a little drained in comparison to the really pristine 50th anniversary. So if you want great color, you sooner or later will have to watch the 50th anniversary cut.
Yeah, that preview version is like, looks like someone spilled coffee on the print or something. Yeah. It's very brown.
It's like, couldn't they spend like $50,000 extra bucks just restoring the color on that? Like, anyway.
I don't know.
They should have consulted us before they put it together.
Sure. Yes. Everyone should always be consulting me when they do Western releases, right?
Absolutely. Well, I had too much coffee before we started recording, so I'm going to play my my little pee break kind of breakup, and then we are actually going to finally discuss the movie, because I'm sure there's some people who are like, can't y'all just fucking talk about why this movie is great? And so I feel like we've gone over the different versions, and now it's time to actually talk about the movie. So we'll be back in 2 minutes. Mr. Lambert, where are you? I'm all alone.
I was getting ice for my refreshments here.
All right,
I'm ready.
Well, I stole a few clips from the DVD to share today, and it's hard to find clips for YouTube because this movie, as I mentioned before, when you watch the right version, it's kind of laid back in its pacing. And it's like, shit, it's hard to find like a 10-second clip that's got something really cool, but also no Bob Dylan music, because it's one of the greatest scores in the history of movies, which is awesome when you're watching it, less advantageous when you're trying to find YouTube-friendly clips. But I've got some good ones. And I guess the best place to start is with a trope, which I usually associate with comic books, with people having long scenes of dialogue while trying to kill each other. But we have a lot of scenes like that in this movie where people are talking about the good old days and having conversations about their relationships while trying to blow each other's brains out. So let's start with an early scene from the movie when Pat Garrett arrives around breakfast time to take in the kid.
What are you taking me in for?
Which one was that?
Buckshot Roberts.
The kid in the Buckshot Roberts!
Hell, that was a year ago. I shot him straight up. Come on in, Pat. I'll warm you breakfast.
And I fucking love that scene. I feel like if you just want the blood and guts of Sam Peckinpah, this movie is less satisfying than The Wild Bunch, but it does have a few scenes that give you a taste of the guns blazing. But I just love how, whether it is Pat Garrett and the character played by LQ Jones, or here Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett, these lengthy conversations during battles, and I just like these are great character defining beats. And I also think it's some of Christopherson's best acting in the movie. He was an inexperienced actor at this time, obviously a huge rock star, and I feel like that's what makes Billy the Kid feel like such a rebel counterculture rock star throughout this movie. But I do think that Chris Christopherson was on his way to becoming a cool character actor. And yeah, sometimes the acting's good. I feel like he's better in this movie when he's acting opposite a really good actor. When it's just Christopherson and Dylan having exchanges, I'm like, ooh, maybe y'all should have put an actor in the scene to help kind of keep things going. Like they're not exactly William Holden and Ernest Borgnine when it's just Dylan and Christopherson. But what do you think of Chris Christopherson and Coburn's relationship in this movie?
I think that, so let me just say that despite like being considered as a very flawed movie, no definitive version, this is my favorite movie. It's my favorite Western. Despite those things, sometimes because of them, sometimes the flaws is just part of the character of it, I mean, in many ways, to even take it to Dylan, it's a lot like having all these unfinished versions is like having the basement tapes,
Totally.
And it's like when they released the basement tapes and Robbie Robertson decided to add a bunch of overdubs and stuff, God rest his soul. But it's like, okay, that's cool, but that's not what we want. We want the boot. We want, we want the pure version of it. We don't want your overdubs. You don't want that. And that's in many ways the way I feel about the Cedar cut. It's like, okay, you might have smoothed it out and everything, and maybe took out a little extraneous dialogue here, a moment there, but it's like, I want the seeds, I want the rhymes, and so I want my art. I want it to be what it is. I want the
extraneous dialogue. Like here's a line that is missing from pretty much every cut except for the two preview versions. When Billy and Pat Garrett are first seeing each other at the beginning, and Billy makes a reference to this girl that this hooker that Garrett has said some condescending things to. She said like, well, if that's all it's worth to you, I might as well sew it up. The line that's missing from all the new versions or all the Cedar cuts is when he says, and then Pat said, you could use a few stitches. And it's kind of gross, coarse, vulgar humor, but that is the world in which we are operating. If you don't want coarse, vulgar humor, don't watch Sam Peckinpah movies. And it just blows my mind that little funny joke keeps getting cut in all these Cedar versions. Once again, preview versions all the way. I need my jokes about needing a few stitches.
Well, Cedar always makes these points about how in the unrefined versions, the preview versions, that scenes kind of just look like the scene reaches its end point and then but then won't stop or whatever. Like he's always trying to make it go out on these notes. But when you cut that scene down, you're not only cutting down the extra line about the stitches, and he says you need a few stitches. You're also cutting out the line where Billy says, "Well, I didn't think she did." That is the end point of the scene. It's the dick measuring contest it's basically Billy's subtle way of dick measuring. I don't think she needed too many stitches. Maybe you did,
Yeah,
and so you lose it. So you're just kind of have this weird anecdote, and you're like, all right, you know what I mean? It's just Cedar has now left it to where you don't get this, and maybe other people won't get that from the line, whatever. That's what I get from it. So it's like, he's deferring to the theatrical there, but there's so many things where they do that, where they cut out, when the guy says, "What the fuck?" or when they cut out the second shooting of Ollinger, or all these little things, or some of Lemuel, the Trading Post guys' their filthy dialogue and stuff. And it's like, well,
I need the full Lemuel. We don't have the full Lemuel prepared for this video because it's just too long a scene, but we have a taste of Lemuel, which is in all the versions. But if you want the full Lemuel, you do need to watch the preview versions because it's fucking hysterical. Starring the great Chill Wills.
You want yourself a woman? One come in there from Albuquerque, run a cat house over there. Name is Bertha. Got an ass on her like a $40 cow and a tit. I'd like to see that thing filled full of tequila.
And it gets much more disgusting from there in the longer versions, but it makes me fucking howl every time, which is why I'm Lemuel for this recording.
Yeah, I saw that. Chill Wills has a comment. I think it's included on the set where he talks about like a lot of actors these days. Burt Reynolds, they go topless, they go bottomless. I'm the navel actor. He's like, I'm the navel guy.
Sugars in there.
So yeah, I mean, and those are all like little things that you lose, and like you're talking about that opening credit sequence. Just to even go back to that, is that it was never fully refined, and Peckinpah, even in his last notes, was still considering trying to revisit it. But it's such a when I had already seen the theatrical, the first version, and when I finally was able to get my hands on the Turner cut, I was blown away by that opening, and I consider it one of Peckinpah's greatest achievements, whether or not it's fully refined, But
it takes the freeze frames from the Wild Bunch opening and improves upon it, and breaking up the dialogue and having the pauses, it just sets the pacing. Like when LQ Jones, like, "Did you come all this way to pay me back the $2 you owe me, Pat?" And then it freezes, and you're like, you get to soak it in, you get to appreciate it, and then it moves on. Then they have like that great exchange, like, yeah. I mean, I just love, I need the pauses and the moments to exhale and the freeze frames to once again just get into the zone and get into the mood. And when you deprive me of that scene, I go into a blind rage.
It's not only just that you have those pauses, and they have refined it because it was so bad in that 2005 cut. It was they really mangled it. And the thing is, yes, part of the point of the scene is this idea of, it's a very beautifully visual montage of, Garrett being murdered, intercut with the kid shooting these chickens, and it starts to look like the kid is shooting Garrett through time, 20 years in the future, 20-something years in the future, and then Garrett starts shooting the chickens, and he starts shooting himself, and it's brilliantly done, and they have improved it in the new 50th anniversary edition. But when you take out those credits, you're not only you still have that part about, this act of Garrett doing this is what ends up killing him in a way. He kills himself, he kills his soul, all that. But when you don't have those credits, you lose that irony. You lose the irony of seeing James Coburn falling back, dying, and then it freeze frames James Coburn. You know what I mean?
And the way you see the title card of him in agony as he's dying, it's gorgeous. It's a black and white or sepia toned image with the red title card. I'm like, fuck yeah, we're watching Pat Garrett, Billy the Kid. I need that shot.
And so it's sad, it's fatalistic. It in many ways has that somewhat structure from The Authentic Death of Henry Jones, which tells you everyone's dead, tells you when people die before they die. You're already entering this movie knowing that Garrett dies and that the kid dies because they say you got paid good money, for killing the kid, right? So you're already setting this up. Everyone in this story's dead, right? So there's that fatalism, but then there is that dark humor, that dark irony that you get with those credits. It's the same thing that he did If They Move, Kill 'Em, directed by Sam Peckinpah. Pat Garrett, Billy the Kid. Here's our main guy dead already.
I'm relieved to hear that when you first saw that, you opened up to it, because that was the first version of the movie that I ever saw, so I never knew anything different. It makes me happy knowing that if somebody only knows the theatrical cut opening or the C-door opening, that they might still be open to being blown away by the more elongated opening, because once again, I totally agree. That elongated opening, it's one of the best things that fucking Peckinpah ever did, even if it's unfinished.
Yeah, and that's the thing that people, and I'll probably go more in depth on Twitter. I don't want to waste too much time with this, but you were talking about Christopherson, and obviously I'm a history guy, and the Billy the Kid history, mythology, all that. I mean, I'm deep into that, and I do oftentimes on Twitter will try to dispel myths about the kid and all these other things. And one of the things that annoys me whenever I see somebody talking about this movie is when somebody goes, "He's too old to play the kid," and I go, "All right, is this because you did a Wikipedia skim and because he's called Billy the Kid and you have just this one fact that he was 21 years old when he died and you're just trying to show that you know something? Because the simple fact is, Pat Garrett, James Coburn is the same. Basically the same level of difference. He's just as he's as he's as old. How do I even say this?
He's
James
just
Coburn,
as equally too old to be Pat Garrett
yeah,
as Chris Christopherson is equally too old
yes,
to be Billy the Kid. But it doesn't bother me in the least because once again, Chris Christopherson, who was a fucking star at the time, brings that outlaw, like kind of like rock star early 70s vibe. And I have a clip of that right here to share now.
And I've been to Texas, and Arizona, Colorado, with your daughter. Marijuana cross the border.
Like for me, that is the vibe. That is the energy of Billy the Kid. He might be technically a little too old, but he's got a youthful energy to him in his portrayal of the character.
Well, it's just the most lazy sort of thing. It's because Pat Garrett isn't called Garrett the Kid.
Yeah,
that no one complains. It's just they don't actually know what the fuck they're talking about. And if we're gonna talk about like, one, we don't know that the kid died when he was 21. According to his own words, he would have been about 25, 26.
According to Young Guns 2, he never died.
Yeah. Yes. But so there's that. People don't even know. And Frederick Nolan, who was like, he's passed away, but he was like the preeminent Billy the Kid, like historian, scholar, said, why won't we listen to the kid's own words about how old he was when he died? This whole business about him being 21 comes from Ash Upson, Pat Garrett's ghostwriter, who gave Billy the Kid the same birthday that he had. So it's like, why are we putting historical? Why would we say this guy who we know is full of shit is correct about the kid's age and not the kid talking himself? Of course, the kid always lied too. But there's historical conjecture there. And yeah, even at 25, 26, Christopherson still looks a bit too old, but not in a way that I would ever consider that would take me out of the movie.
Not at all. He's a fucking rock star. I'm all in on his portrayal. Even if he's less experienced than the rest of the cast, which is admittedly maybe the finest cast of character actors ever assembled for any Western, nobody's going to look good compared to all those fucking legends.
Yeah, and Coburn's portrayal of Garrett, I think, is one of the great Western characters. A matching of a character with an actor, and I personally think it's up there with an Ethan Edwards, the John Wayne Ethan Edwards.
He's fucking lethal. He's so lethal, and I've got a great scene where it's almost like when a fighter's getting prepared for a big fight, they need a tune-up fight to get ready. Here is Pat Garrett's tune-up fight, or a section of it, when he's basically kind of, getting his sand going so that he can face Billy.
Now, I want you to take the stock of that gun and wrap him smartly on the back of the head. Now, you do it, boy, or this bullet that's going through his chest liable to come out the other side and tickle your private parts.
Private parts?
Like, first of all, it's hilarious that they use the expression private parts, but I love how throughout the movie we see James Coburn just bossing people around, like when he deputizes Jack Elam, or when he tells that boy, I want you to run all the way down to my house and tell my wife I'm going to be home for dinner. Or when he arrives to pick up Slim Pickens, how he sees that thief and he just starts like a bully pushing him with his horse. And he's like, you get your ass in there. And I just love seeing James Coburn throwing his weight around throughout the movie. He's fucking awesome in this movie.
Well, so the people that make those complaints, no one ever complains about James Coburn. No one ever complains about his age. And so I go, in this world of this movie, if we're going to accept that James Coburn is, for this story, for this script, for what they're trying to say, is the best possible actor for Pat Garrett, and I believe that, whether or not it's completely historically accurate, do you think that it would be, don't you think it would be a little absurd if he was hanging out with a 21-year-old guy talking about old times?
Yeah.
What was he? You know what I mean? What was he?
21-year-olds don't talk about the glory days. 21-year-olds are in their glory days.
Yeah, what's he doing? Hanging out with a 15-year-old? Like, what the fuck? Yeah. So it's like, and the thing is, this is a movie about Pat Garrett more so than Billy the Kid. And whether or not the filmmakers were intending that, I know that they were and the kid doesn't ever fully become maybe the character that he should be. You know, this is not my like ideal version of Billy the Kid on screen, but as a reflection of Garrett, who does take over the movie, and for Rudy Wurlitzer, who started with the script just titled Billy the Kid, Garrett started taking over. You know, and even in the Authentic Death of Henry Jones, the Garrett Dad Longworth character is not fully developed. He's a great character, but it's not developed in this way. But you also see it taking over Peckinpah. You know, Peckinpah, I think, saw himself in Garrett. I think he kind of wished he saw himself in the kid, but also at the same time,
he felt compromised. He always referred to himself as like a good whore who goes where he's kicked, and now he does nothing unless it's for money. And I always feel like methinks the maiden doth protest too much. You're trying way too hard to act like you're a sellout when we all know that you're like an artist struggling to get out of the body of this true vulgarian, self-destructive, cocaine-addicted alcoholic and that sort of thing. But anytime he talks about how like his movies were designed to show you the horror of violence, I'm like, give me a fucking break. You're also jacking off to it. And when he talks about how he's only a sellout who works for money, it's like, yeah, but you also have the soul of a poet. And so, yeah, it's always a good idea to kind of read beneath whatever Peckinpah's public statements might have been. But I do think he really identifies with the character of Pat Garrett and this inner torment. Do you like yearn for a life of freedom, or do you yearn for a life where you get to live to be old and gray and get old with this country and have financial security? It's something that every artist will struggle with.
Yeah, and it's like this you know, Garrett, he becomes a company's stooge, but he tries to still maintain a certain level of independence, at least on what he thinks is that, you know, he tried, you know, shove it up your ass and set fire to it and everything. And it's like, well, you're still doing their dirty work. Whether or not you're,
or when he tells the other deputy, like, this country's getting old and I aim to get old with it, but like, I'm only going to tell you this once. I don't need to hear you say anything about Billy the Kid or so. I can't remember the exact line, but you can tell he's clinging to some principles where he doesn't want to hear a much younger person telling him what he thinks about Chisholm and so on and so on. Oh, Chisholm's a great man and blah, blah, blah. But by the end of the movie, he is shooting his own reflection.
Yeah, well, which was something that they took from Peckinpah's own life, but also the way he, even when he does those scenes, pushing people around, put the hat over his eyes, read the cans, do this, he is playing a director. You know what I mean?
Quality tomatoes.
Yeah. And so you do see that, and you see where he will push people around and be a bully and things, and so I think he is in many ways like the purest expression of what probably Peckinpah thought of himself. But at the same time, when he shows the kid and everything, and one of the reasons why, for example, if you cast the kid younger, like, you know, Chris Christopherson, yeah, he's a little leathery and everything, but he still has something of a boyish face, whether he's got some wrinkles and things.
I think he's a little soft in the center. He's got some man boobs and some soft kind of jowls. Like, he's not a physical specimen. He's not like made out of leather like James Coburn, who basically had been training in martial arts with Bruce Lee and shit like that.
but that's kind of the point, is that this is the Billy who, you know, his escape is his high point of his life, and then it's just drifting and it's just shooting the heads off chickens, and you see at the beginning, Garrett says, "Don't you get stale around here?" The kid doesn't have. His friends don't come to rescue him. The kid doesn't go to actually fight.
Those guys do jack shit all day, every day. I'm like, do y'all just do nothing with your time besides just, like, as Harry Dean Stanton says, like, oh, down in Mexico, he'd just be another gringo, like, you know, shitting out chili beans and waiting for nothing. It's like, how is that any different from what y'all are doing at Fort Sumner?
Exactly.
Where you do jack shit all goddamn day.
But the tragedy of the film, in a way, is that Garrett is this person, and he can't live in either world. And I think that's probably what Peckinpah felt too. He can't go back to shooting off heads, you know, of chickens and just laying around and just being an idiot, right? But he can't go back to his domesticity or that either. And that's also when that, with that ending with the kid throwing rocks and or shit. Let's say both. Let's say rocks and shit. Which is obviously like a reference to Shane. It's an inverse of Shane. Yeah. And there's something about this story where Shane, which was one of Peckinpah's favorite movies, and maybe he was his favorite Western film, he might have said at least once or twice, a huge influence on him. But that movie is about a killer coming in and helping these, these small ranchers and everything against big business and these guys who are trying to close the. And Garrett is coming into this small town, these people that love the kid, the Hispanic communities and everything, and he's going there as a stooge for big business who comes in and kills this guy and leaves. So you have this sort of
He's
inverse.
not quite as bad as the rapists and murderers working for Chisholm, but he's getting there.
Yes, yeah, and Chisholm is, in many ways, at least portrayed in this film, very much like
Barry Sullivan. And Barry Sullivan, goddamn, talking about another great character actor from the world of, from a shitload of great movies, but seeing him play Chisholm, he brings so much dignity to a character who's discussed as being pure scum. Like, if you want to get an idea of who Chisholm is, there's a scene where we see Chisholm's men in the field in operation, and it lets you know exactly what Billy the Kid thinks about Chisholm's fellas.
Jesus Christ.
You working for Chisholm?
Yeah, we're working for him.
and
that might as well. That might as well be Jim Aubrey himself or any of his hatchet men working for MGM at that time. But I feel like that's like the perfect articulation of who Chisholm is, what his men do, because they're branding Paco and they're raping his, I think it's his daughter or his wife. But anyway, it's just, it is the most grotesque scene in the movie. And it comes in this stark contrast. Well, actually, I wrote it down. I always forget which scene comes right before it. Oh my God, I can't believe it's something that's really.
I think it's the riverboat scene.
Exactly. All right. So you have the riverboat scene, which might be the most mysterious and enigmatic and beautiful scene in the history of the Western genre. And transitioning from that to this horrific scene of horrible brutality, even by Peckinpah standards. And I feel like that in a lot of ways is kind of like the emotional peak of the film, contrasting those two scenes together. I really dislike the Chisholm scene with Emilio Fernandez. Because of his dialogue, or because
I feel it gives motivation to the kid where there didn't need to be. He didn't, you introduce this character and kill him off 5 minutes later, and that's supposed to be the dramatic crux of why the kid stays.
That tears it, and he rides back.
He doesn't need that. And Chisholm was ruthless and everything in history. He never, I don't know. This kind of stuff is way more egregious than I think any of his men ever did. But in Wurlitzer's original script, Chisholm was going to be present there, I believe. And Peckinpah was like, no, it's like Chisholm is an asshole, but he himself is a pawn of a bigger thing. And that's why they include,
which Jason Robards perfectly articulates when he says this land is vast and primitive and it needs investment. There are political interests here, but it needs, to be allowed to prosper and grow. And I'm like, whoa, this is it's a really cool scene with Jason Robards, because he'd also, as Cable Hogue, had been so different only a few years prior, and here he is playing the governor. But it's a brilliant scene. But I feel like another great scene showing Chisholm's men is when we have this really, really fun turkey hunt scene where Bob Dylan's trying to catch him with a lasso and Billy's screwing it all up, and they leave one fellow behind to watch the horses or the cows that they've just stolen from Chisholm. Chisholm's men show up and they basically kind of torture him a bit before they finally kill him, whereupon we get maybe my favorite 12 seconds of action in the movie as Bob Dylan and Chris Christopherson throw down. And it's that last shot that I really love. Peckinpah knew to make somebody getting shot look so fucking painful. Whether it's one of those kid soldiers in the Wild Bunch who gets shot during the bridge sequence by some of the miscreants working for Robert Ryan, or here, but you don't have to have a whole bunch of gore and a bunch of blood or whatnot. Just show the impact of a bullet, making it really look like it fucking hurts. And I feel like that shot of the guy falling backwards is pitch perfect. But that's one of Chisholm's boys getting taken out by Billy the Kid.
Yeah, and for people who are interested in the actual history of Billy the Kid, that scene's interesting, not because it's historically accurate, that never happened, but the thing that really, in many ways, kicked off the Lincoln County War, which is what eventually made the kid who he was and is kind of the background of this whole movie, is that John Tunstall, who had taken the kid in, and and you'll see it in Young Guns and all these other movies. You'll see
Carrot
Left-Handed
Stamp,
Gun.
baby.
Everything.
Yeah.
But he was the kid and his friends were off chasing, wild turkeys while he was murdered by the Dolan Murphy faction, not Chisholm's men. And after they killed him, they killed his horse and set them both together, like almost like a married couple side by side, like laying in a bed. And they kind of build on that in this by putting him on the horse. And I think it's maybe more explicit in the wordless script. Like it's supposed to look like he's humping his horse, like the most disrespectful thing you can do to a body. And so on one level, if you know the history, you can look at that scene as something of I guess, I don't know, an homage or something to what made the kid who the kid was. But if you also know the history, you could look at it as the kid hasn't even learned his lesson. He's still off doing this. His friends are still getting killed while he's off fucking around trying to chase turkeys and things, So it's like, if you do know the history, there's a little added layer there. It's not just like, we'll throw in an action scene just to get some squibs in. And to talk about the violence of the movie, because you mentioned it earlier, when you do watch the violence in this film, it's not the spectacle of the Wild Bunch. It's not as refined or beautiful as The Getaway, and you go, is this because Peckinpah never truly got to shape the film in the editing room to his satisfaction? Is it because the shoot was just so chaotic and insane, Peckinpah was so out of it that he just never really got to put himself into those scenes the way he wanted to, perhaps? And so much of this movie, you wonder, like, so much of its feel and its effect, you go, obviously most of it's purposeful, but you also wonder of the loose editing never being refined, giving it that lazy feel. Like there's things in there where you go, it's such a unique movie, and it not being totally trimmed and tightened and everything just adds to that. You don't necessarily want to see the Wild Bunch of The Getaway.
But the violence in this movie, though, is still really impactful. Like, just forgive me if I show one more clip of Slim Pickens in action, where the gunshots, you really feel them.
I understand you've been riding for.
That's the wrong one. Slim. I got to go back to. I got Slim and I got Slim in action. Hang on one sec. That last little bit when the bullet goes through him, it's not like there's blood exploding in both directions, but god damn, it really makes you feel that pain. Or the way Slim gets hit in the shoulder and falls. Admittedly, he's not running in the most graceful fashion, but you feel the impact of the bullet on the shoulder. So even if it's not arterial blood spray like in some like classic samurai movie of the 1960s, I think the violence in this movie is very effective. It's just a little different from what we see like in the climax of The Wild Bunch.
No, I mean, I'll get into it. I think this is Peckinpah's ultimate statement about violence in the Old West. I think this is the best statement about violence in any Western. So I wonder if aesthetically that was purposeful, because if you compare just the way the editing montages and the shootouts go, if you compare it to The Wild Bunch or to The Getaway, he holds these shots way longer. You don't know if maybe he didn't have as much coverage, or I don't know, but he holds these shots longer. It doesn't have that quick cutting. People talk about Peckinpah for his slow motion, but what they don't talk about is the slow motion is always within quick cuts. So you're not just watching a big stunt that is just trying to, just be a spectacle of to itself. Wow, is that cool?
The best examples in the first battle in The Wild Bunch, a guy's falling off a roof, and you see it in stages, and in between those stages, you see other action that's fast. And so you're constantly cross-cutting back and forth with that fall, and it's glorious.
Yeah, it's dizzying. It's a roller coaster. The slow motion is, in many ways, that isn't the point of the scene. It's almost the slow motion makes the stuff that was shot in regular motion that much more intense and impactful. It's like the build up before the fall on a roller coaster or something.
Totally.
It's not when you see people that kind of rip it off. I'm not going to call anyone out in particular, but they
Yeah, but we
oftentimes
did a podcast on it. The Bastard Sons of Billy the Kid, or Bastard Sons of Sam Peckinpah. He had a lot of imitators back in the day.
Yeah, well, I just mean even now when you watch slow motion violence in movies, the slow motion is to say, isn't this cool? But it's not ever. It's never used in the way that it's actually augmenting the stuff that's moving in regular time better. It's always that's the end point for them. It's like that's the cool part, the slow motion. It's not like the Peckinpah's slow motion isn't also cool, but it's not like, it's more impactful because of what it's put up against. And this movie doesn't have that spectacle and everything. But when I say I think this is Peckinpah's ultimate statement about violence, it's because it's that he builds on things that he was already doing in the Wild Bunch, but really develops them. You have not only every act of violence has an audience, and the audience is completely desensitized, and everyone in the film is they're so desensitized, they're so used to killing that they don't even know how to get out of it. They don't once they're wrapped in it, like the Alamosaville, you ain't thought of another way, have you?
Yeah.
Nope. Let's get to it.
Well, speaking of people being preoccupied or desensitized to violence, one of my favorite shots in the history of Peckinpah. Like creepy kids desensitized to death and violence are a recurring motif or theme in a lot of his movies. Like the kids, setting the scorpion and the ants on fire at the beginning of the Wild Bunch, but those kids just nonchalantly and casually playing on the gallows. Vintage Peckinpah.
Well, also that's why that opening is so important. That fatalism, that they're all, and the same thing with that the riverboat scene of them shooting. Not only on the surface, you see how these killings are so random and senseless that people shooting at bottles could potentially become something violent, but also that he's just drifting down, and knowing that everyone is already drifted to their fate, knowing that everyone's on, you know what I mean? Everyone's on that riverboat of violence, and they can't get off. They don't know another way. They don't know how to get out of it. And this is in some ways Peckinpah's own commentary, because he was trying with the Wild Bunch and stuff. He was obviously he gets off on the violence. We will just say he's only trying to be disturbing, or only trying to show violence as it is. That's so reductive.
Yeah, it's possible to have two different thoughts in your head at the same time. You can want to show people the horrors of violence while at the same time reveling in it at the same time. It is possible to experience those two emotions simultaneously, as we often do with Peckinpah's portrayal of violence.
Yeah, well, also let's talk about another Western that explores violence and gets a lot of credit. It's a Western I love and I talk about all the time, but I seem like I'm always attacking it. Unforgiven. Yes.
I knew it.
And that's a movie that it always gets credit as this Western that really is the first to contend with violence in the way, whatever.
Spells the romanticism of the Western, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, everybody has their talking points all prepared.
Yeah, and it's a great movie. I think it's a great movie. It's one of the great Westerns.
When it came out, and I've been a fan ever since.
But that is a surface, to me, that's a surface level reading of violence. It's not that it's not complex and everything, but the violence and stuff is, I guess, supposed to be disturbing in a way or whatever, or at least that's what they're trying to sell you on, when in actuality, whatever. But the thing is, Peckinpah's already beyond that. Peckinpah has already he's with the Wild Bunch, he's pulling you in. He's making you go, there's one side that's going to watch it and go, that's the most horrific thing I've ever seen. And there's one side that's going to is going to get off on the violence. But the thing is, when he does that, he doesn't let you get away with whether or not the montage, the spectacle, and everything pulls you in, right? He doesn't let you get away with not dealing with the fact that there's bystanders, there's innocent bystanders, there's
Like
women
the woman
being
who gets
shot.
trampled by Pike and the Wild Bunch, where there's escaping the city. He tramples an old lady, and when he gets out of town, a piece of her clothing is still wrapped around the horse, and he just kind of casually discards it. And he looks back. He's wrestling with what he's done. We're wrestling with what he's done, but he's not going to go back and say he's sorry. He's going to push on.
Yeah, or just like in the end sequence where you go, is this an act of nihilism? Is this an act of self-sacrifice? Is this an act of redemption? Or is it all of them? You don't know. And so it's like when they finally act on their principles, it still is, they're still using women as shields. They're still, they're still fucking everyone up. And seeing that honesty could either disturb you, or it might even make it more bad. Like, yeah, fuck it, fuck everyone. Old Testament God, destroy everything. You know what I mean? You're like, wow, he's really going this far. And so it's
speaking of Old Testament, I've got one final clip which brings a little bit of religion into the drama, mixing a little religion with the craving for violence.
I want to tell you one last thing, personal, kid. It's going to be a loose rope and a long drop. What good people are coming just to see your poor sinning spirit meet the devil. And I'm aiming to please them by making sure you say the Lord's Prayer before you do a proper cakewalk and soil your drawers.
I mean, that's stirring together a lot. We got Old Testament, we got a craving to kill, and a craving to watch somebody shit their pants in front of everybody. And so, yeah, you got to digest a lot of conflicting emotions all in one.
But what Peckinpah was doing in the Wild Bunch is he's like, yeah, you enjoy, and people like Clint Eastwood who kind of talk shit on the Wild Bunch, and like David Webb Peoples who wrote Unforgiven, has talked a little shit on the violence in the Wild Bunch. It's like, well, yeah, if you think you're smart, like, oh yeah, he's getting off on it. He's not actually being against it. But the thing is, you're only taking that from the critics who are trying to defend the movie because they don't want to admit that the violence in the film is exciting and invigorating.
They've got an erection while they're watching it. Yeah,
and evil. And that's Peckinpah's point. Peckinpah's point is like, yeah, you love this. Why do you love this? You explore why And so by the time we get to Pat Garrett, the spectacle isn't quite there. It's not that he doesn't have beautiful shots and that the shootouts aren't as good as any other 70s Western. Like, they're great. They're not Wild Bunch or Getaway or what quality, but you watch it and it's so perfunctory. It's so tiring. It's so, it's just like, it is just like, even watching the theatrical, I was like, the violence in the movie is just it's weird. It's dulled. It feels like sort of the edge cut off when you are drunk and something happens. Like the edge, there's something about the violence that the edge is sort of cut off. The edge is not there. Yeah, and there's a detachment. You have all these people that have seen it. When there's the Alamo Seville fight, the whole family goes out to watch. You know what I mean? She takes her kid. The lady's holding her kid.
It's like watching TV. Yeah.
Yes, they're all just drifting towards that place, and so.
But I feel like when it comes to his
I
violence, nothing makes us, the audience, more complicit in the violence than the fact that when he would make movies that didn't have the violence, like The Ballad of Cable Hogue, a movie which I love, but it's more of a peaceful love story in a lot of ways than like The Wild Bunch. But nobody went. Or when he makes a movie like Junior Bonner, nobody goes. So it's like, yeah, people might criticize Peckinpah for glorifying violence, but they all show up and buy a ticket when he lets the blood start to flow. And so I feel like Peckinpah is complicit. We're complicit. We're all complicit in being both repelled by and turned on by his portrayals of violence.
Yeah, and he had famously said that he felt he failed with the Wild Bunch in the way that he thought it would bring about catharsis. And he said that he thought he failed in doing that. Obviously, there's a story, I can't remember where it was at, but in another country they had a screening, and all these soldiers, and they all fired their guns in the air, and they said they wanted to go die like William Holden, and Peckinpah was horrified by that, and so
Yeah, it's like people who
in
read
this
American
movie,
Psycho and don't realize it's a satire. Like, I want to be Patrick Bateman. No, 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 no. That's not the point of the book.
yeah, so this movie, in many ways, it's also about the desensitizing of violence in film that he contributed to, because you see all these audiences watching violence, and it is what it is. Just like all the stories that they tell, and I guess it's hard to talk about this movie without jumping on so many different topics. Being
That's
coherent.
why 50 years later, people are still watching it and still talking about it, because the movie is riveting and everything surrounding the making of the movie is riveting. And that's what makes film history so much goddamn fun. When you have good movies and great stories. And it's why, it's why people are drawn to this movie and so many others and will never get tired of them.
I mean, yeah, and that's the thing is, Peckinpah has his impulses and his pathology and his obsessions and the things he gets off on, but he almost always seems to want to temper it, like ground it, not fully give into it. He always wants to throw something else in to where you're not gonna fully, like, his characters always do shitty things that could pull you away from them, because he doesn't want you to he doesn't want that easy, that easy form of storytelling in
Billy
any
kills
aspect.
Belle. Maybe the most likable character in the movie is Belle. And what drives me crazy about a lot of the different versions of the movie is how they remove his line when he's playing cards with Billy the Kid. And Billy says, "What do you believe in, Belle?" He's like, "Well, I believe I'm a little man with a job to do, but I am going to have to see that bet and raise you 5. But that little line about how I'm a little man with a job to do gets cut in so many versions other than the preview versions. But when Billy kills Belle, I mean, Belle's just told the world's most boring story, and he's like, "That's a fascinating story, Belle." That whole exchange. But when you see Billy killing one of the most affable, kind of just like easygoing guys in the movie, it doesn't allow you to hero worship Billy, because you see that Billy is a fucking murderer of the nicest guy in the movie.
Yeah. And it's like when you see people talk about Peckinpah, about his approach to violence, or the elegiac quality of the way he portrays the West, it's always a surface level thing where it's this sad thing about the dying of the West and Pat Garrett and Willie the Kid, and that is obviously there, but he doesn't do it in this sort of a facile way, because the thing is, you have all these old timers, and every story they tell is horrible. Someone stealing a horse, putting a rattlesnake in there, shooting someone. Use Christmas,
Hit him through the neck. Yeah, it's like he's just rambling, lost in his own memories and thoughts, telling a story about how somebody stole somebody's horse, just up and did it, and then to get payback, one of them ends up putting a rattlesnake in the other guy's blanket, and it's like, Jesus fucking Christ! But it's just yeah. And I think that story takes place in 1871, like 10 years prior. Yeah, it doesn't make the past seem like any place you'd want to be.
Yeah, but it's also Owen Carroll drowned in the Rio Grande trying to get to Old Mex. U.S. Christmas getting shot over in the boots. Every story they tell is a bad story, but they all tell the story in a wistful, sort of like nostalgic way. And in many ways, that might be Peckinpah himself too. Like, yeah, I do long for this time, but I also know it's fucked up, it's stupid, it's it's violent, and I lament it, but I'm also going to show you, like, this. It wasn't like a good thing. It wasn't this pure Eden or something that we've lost. It was in itself, evil, and also, Cable Hogue, The Wild Bunch, Ride the High Country. His big elegiac westerns are all turn of the century, early 20th century, and this one is the 1880s. And so you go, this is his big elegy for the West, but it doesn't shortchange that it was not a good place. It's always that push and pull of Peckinpah of his impulses and his desires in the moment. But it's also knowledge
be a
that
good place, like the saloon kept by what's that character's name? Rupert. While it might be a horrible place full of random acts of violence, and I do need to give a shout out to Rupert because in nearly every version of the movie, they always cut out the first exchange with Rupert when he talks about how bad things have gotten in town and how it's like, I haven't been up to that side of town in a month, and I ain't going now on account of you. They always cut that and just cut to him asking, you got any ladies, blah, blah, blah. And then he sits up. But I need the early part where he's talking about how bad things are so that when he sits up and starts talking about, oh, I've been partial to her and blah, 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 that there's humor there where he's able to switch gears from pessimism to excitement. And anyway, it's one of the wildest portrayals of a house of ill repute that I've ever seen in a movie. And I think my favorite bit is just James Coburn's back turned and they're washing him off because, he's like, you got to yank the pants off. They've been on a little while. But as they're washing him, you hear him just go, Jesus. And when he says it, he just really sells it. So it is a horrible time full of violence and snakes biting people through the neck. But every once in a while, you get to have a foursome with a bunch of lovely ladies. And that scene is fucking wild.
Well, and I think that is Peckinpah, is that he has the things that they love, but he knows that they're rotten. And he doesn't have a vision of what life should be, or for himself or anyone else. It's like he knew that he was self-destructing, and he knew that he was drifting in that place, and he didn't know how to get off, because the thing is, what would he get off to? Where it's just like, back off to what? The Wild Bunch, right? You see this
back
character.
Off to what? Yeah, great line.
All he had was basically, it's like all he had was movies in a way, and so it's a person who just didn't. Like his criticism of these characters in the movie, they didn't have the imagination not to think of anything beyond self-destruction, But the thing is,
nope. Yeah.
But the thing is, he still loved it. He still loved it, and so he still mourns the loss of these things or whatever. But he doesn't bullshit you and soft pedal it or something. You know what I mean? It's like I love McCabe and Mrs. Miller and everything, but as a movie about prostitutes and a brothel and everything, it really does soft change how harsh that life would be in many ways. It's kind of portrayed as.
Well, it's got one really horrible scene where you hear the girl screaming and she's attacking the guy in the tent. Whatever he was doing, it was not kind or gentle, and she's freaking out and trying to kill him. And so you get a brief glimpse into the horrors of the life expectancy of those girls was not lengthy.
Yeah, exactly, and not that movie needs to get into all that or anything, but what I was saying is that I think as an artist, Peckinpah, at least in his best films, could never fully let himself buy into any of it, and so I think that's what makes the movie so vital and so interesting as Westerns. Like I think this. I mean, in many ways, I think that Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is something about that. I mean, I consider it the ultimate statement on the Western.
Yeah, it's my favorite movie by Peckinpah. I just don't think it's his best movie. And the reason I draw a distinction is when I say best, I mean objectively on a technical level, The Wild Bunch is a major movie in every way, shape, or form. If you wanted to introduce somebody to Westerns, The Wild Bunch would be a great place to start. But once you get kind of sad and lonely and, have mixed feelings or melancholy or conflicting feelings about romanticism versus nihilism or whatever, this is the most complex movie that Peckinpah ever made. I love Straw Dogs, and I love The Ballad of Cable Hogue, and I love Ride the High Country. He made a lot of really, really good ones. But yeah, my favorite movie by Peckinpah will always be Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. And I don't think that'll ever change.
Yeah, I mean, I do consider The Wild Bunch to be the best Western ever made. I mean, I feel it's almost flawless. And it doesn't have these oftentimes maybe weird asides or sometimes dead ends or big flaws that this movie has. The Wild Bunch is a better movie than Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. It's a better Western overall, but I find this movie richer. I find there's so much more here. This is the Wild Bunch might have been Peckinpah's apex, but at the same time, he still refined his use of montage. The way he uses cutting the flashbacks in The Getaway is brilliant. I mean, it's amazing. And his development of montage of cutting back and forth between the chickens and Garrett and Billy and all that at the beginning is it's not the spectacle of the end gunfight in the Wild Bunch or whatever, but there's just so much going on there that he's telling visually and he's wrapping up the whole story there, and it's
pure raw cinema is
brilliant.
the expression I like to use. Pure raw cinema.
Yeah, and so it's like he was growing as an artist, but deteriorating as a person, which of course is
hilarious is that he was 47 when he made this, and he looks 77. I turned 48 today. Don't tell anybody. But as I was going over my notes for the movie, I was like, wow, Peckinpah was 47 when he made this movie. He looks 1,000, and it would only get worse from here, like, because booze will definitely age you a little prematurely. But once he discovered the booger sugar, oh my Lord, that's when he really flew off the rails.
Well, I mean, that's a perfect example as to why I tell people that think Chris Christopherson is too old for the kid to fuck off, because it's like, we can see a guy who looks decades older. Or let's even talk about, obviously he looks older. I work in forensic. I work with people who are hard living, dead people at this point. And you have to take into account how hard did they live and how much would that age them if I'm going to try to do a composite sketch. And so a hard living Westerner, in his 20s, I could believe he could look like Chris Christopherson. But let's
look at like Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca looks 80, but he was like 42 when he people used to live hard back in the day.
Well, even if let's even talk about like Chris Christopherson's sometime co-star and bandmate and someone who covered some of his songs, Johnny Cash. Look at Johnny Cash when he was 21 or 22, around the age that Billy the Kid supposedly was when he died. Tell me that guy doesn't look like he's in his fucking 40s. Tell me that the 21-year-old Johnny Cash doesn't look older. Even a Martin Lawrence
meme when people are like, motherfucker, you look 30. But yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a 36-year-old Chris Christopherson looks older than a 21-year-old Johnny Cash. Like, anyway, I'm going to do a thread. I'm going to explore that later. I'll do a thread.
This movie since 97. Over and over and over again. Never once has the age of the characters ever even entered my stupid drug-addled brain. Not once. It does not occur to me at all. My only kind of like nagging grievances with the movie are, I will concede Paul Sedor's point that there are some scenes where you're like the perfect example when Pat Garrett tells Billy, like, I'm asking you, but in like 2 weeks, I'm making you. And then that scene does seem to kind of have like 3 or 4 separate endings, each of which is less satisfying than the one that came before. But I will take the slackness of those scenes just to have the richness of all the dialogue and all the different points of view, as opposed to making the film feel polished and perfected and finished. The movie will never feel finished, but I don't love it because I want it to feel finished. I love it because of all the other qualities, the wonderful character actors, the marvelous dialogue, the astonishing music, the moral ambiguity and the complexity of the film. It's just doing so many things. And do you think you could, for the new, if there's somebody out there who is unfamiliar with the work of Sam Peckinpah, I apologize that you had to listen to two just giant nerds rattle on for 2 hours about his career. But if you were to give somebody an introductory guide to the order in which somebody should discover the work of Sam Peckinpah as a way of kind of easing into it and then becoming obsessed, like, what should that journey look like? Where do they start? And at one point, do they rip off the Band-Aid and dive into Pat Garrett? Because they're the movies that are for his diehard fans, like The Iron Cross. No one should start with The Iron Cross. But if you've seen all these other movies a million times, sure, watch The Iron Cross. It fucking rocks, blah, blah, blah. It's just not remotely on the level of his best movies. So I feel like movies like The Getaway, don't start with The Getaway, but sooner or later you must get there. But what is the journey one must take?
I mean, I would start at The Wild Bunch for sure. I honestly don't know.
My journey started with Convoy on TV. I had no idea who Sam Peckinpah was. I started Convoy Pan and Scan on cable. That's where I started. Then I saw The Wild Bunch, Letterbox VHS. Then I saw Straw Dogs, Pan and Scan VHS. Then I saw Ride the High Country on Laserdisc. And then I bought Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid on Laserdisc summer 97. I was working in LA. I didn't have my player with me, but when I got home, it was the first movie I popped in, and I just fell under its spell and never recovered.
I think my first exposure to Peckinpah, I think I was about 8 or 9, and I watched the end of sorry, someone's calling me. I watched the end of The Killer Elite with James Conn fighting ninjas or something, because I love ninjas. I was like, whoa, this is great. And that was, but I obviously I didn't know who Peckinpah was or anything at that time. It was only until years later, after seeing other Peckinpahs and finally getting around to Killer Elite, where the memory, I was like, oh shit, that was my exposure to Peckinpah was James Caan fighting ninjas.
Which I like that movie. I just would never recommend anybody start with that movie, but I wouldn't recommend anybody start with Convoy either, and it didn't hurt me.
Yeah, so I don't know where to go from there. And Pat Garrett, Billy the Kid is always. I mean, I don't know. I always consider myself just so deep in the weeds in regards to westerns and things that, like, I'm always leery about like recommending stuff to people. Like, you're gonna love it because I have no idea. I don't know what
enough to see him on the screen. That will really make or break. Like when I first saw The Ballad of Cable Hogue, it was on the screen at the Lamley Sunset 5 in LA. Every summer in the late 90s at the Monica 4 and at the Sunset 5, they'd show a shitload of Westerns, and it was tons of fun. So seeing Ballad of Cable Hogue in that fashion, I became an instant fan. And if somebody saw it on VHS in the 90s, maybe they wouldn't have had the same experience. And so, but like when I finally saw The Wild Bunch in 70 fucking millimeter at the Egyptian Theater in LA, I was already, in love with it from watching it letterbox on VHS, but seeing it in 70 millimeter was something else entirely. And so, yeah, if you're lucky enough to live near any revival house that's going to play any of Peckinpah's films on the big screen, go. You can thank me later. But I guess sooner or later, if you love movies enough, and if you love Peckinpah enough, and if you love Westerns enough, sooner or later, you're going to watch all of his movies. But yeah, like even at a certain point, you got to wrestle with Major Dundee. Like if you love Tony Stella's glorious poster for it, Major Dundee is a deeply flawed movie that had its own problems. It's not as good as Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, but at a certain point, you're going to have to throw down.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I don't know. I might go Wild Bunch. Maybe I'd go Straw Dogs. Not that that's like up there for me, but it is still like a very coherent vision and a very powerful movie.
Yeah, you don't have to learn 50 years of history in order to understand what you're watching. Like sometimes I feel like it's a barrier to entry. People are like, I don't want to know all this stuff. I just want to enjoy the movie. And I feel like with The Wild Bunch and Straw Dogs, you can just throw the movies in with no context and just watch them.
Yeah, and that is one of the things about Pat Garrett, Billy the Kid too, is that there's almost like there's either an understanding that the people watching the movie have a general idea of the myth, or Peckinpah is just so audacious in his storytelling that he just lets things, if you get it, you get it, or if you don't, you don't. Like, for example, Billy the Kid going to an outhouse and having a gun in there, and we're never told who hid it in there or whatever. And in Wurlitzer's script, he doesn't get it out of the outhouse. I think he gets it off of J.W. Bell, which now with forensic evidence and blood on the ground, it seems to be that's how Billy the Kid got the gun. He started hitting J.W. Bell with his chains, ran up the stairs, or got his gun, wrestled his gun away, shot him a few times, but there was, for a long time, people also believe that someone hid a gun in the outhouse. There were multiple tellings of the story. And a lesser filmmaker would tell you who did it. You know what I mean? And you're not sure.
It was a female admirer, because one of the best parts of this movie is how wherever he goes, the girls, like he's a fucking rock star, the girls are gazing at him lustily. And like when he walks back, when he finally gets back to Fort Sumner and he basically kicks Harry Dean Stanton out of bed, the girl in bed, she's not looking at Harry Dean Stanton. She's up on her elbows, smiling at Billy, and all the other girls there are gazing at him as well. And I'm like, yeah, that's a big part of what I love about this movie. And I like to believe one of his female admirers left the gun, but Peckinpah never tells us.
Yeah, and he's audacious in those ways. And we were talking about Horizon, and I was very hard on the movie, and I was very hard on how Costner introduces these characters. You never get a feel for them, and then he puts on this heavy dramatic music and has a speech where you're supposed to feel something, and you're like, I don't know these people yet.
According to Michael Rooker, we're all watching too much TikTok, and that's why we didn't like it. I'm like, well, I've watched 2 videos of TikTok ever. Maybe the movie's not as good as you would like to believe.
Well, fair enough. Hey, look at it. If people like it, God bless them. I want people to like Westerns. I don't want to make any. I don't want to, yuck your yum if that's your thing. If you like Horizon. But what I'm saying is like, and maybe it seems somewhat hypocritical of me because this film has that Slim Pickens, Katie Urato scene, the knocking on heaven's door scene, and a lot of people do complain, like, why is this character getting this big ending? We've only seen him for a few minutes. But the thing is, the difference is that Peckinpah lets you know these people immediately. You only need those minutes. You know the history, whether
Mama,
or not
where to put my badge. I love the way he says, "Mama, where to put my badge." It just shows they're so intimate and they're a team and they're hell on wheels together. And when she's gazing at him with such sadness, and Slim Pickens, he almost seems to be in awe of the experience of death, the way he's looking off and holding his stomach, that he can't even believe what he's experiencing. It's one of the most, I'm getting chills even talking about it. It's one of the most transcendent moments in the history of the Western genre. And that song, yeah, it definitely helps set the mood.
Yeah, and he's laying by the water watching, I'm going to build my boat. I'm going to drift out of this territory. You know what I mean? It's like, even the guy who's saying he wants to get out is still going to be trying to drift out. And he's still locked into that fate. And he's just looking at the water as he dies. And so it's like, okay, did the movie earn that? I believe it does, in terms of writing, direction, and the actors, whether or not not only their history, but the way they perform it. And it says more also about Peckinpah. It's a little bit of a mini Ride the High Country. It's almost like Pat Garrett's interrupted their movie. You know what I mean? Slim Pickens' movie about the Asian sheriff or whatever who wants to enter his house justified, right?
It's like a brilliant little short film. Pat Garrett rolls in the town, bribes him to help out. Slim Pickens finally decides, all right, I'm going to do this without pay. Flips the coin back to him. He's got that turning point. And his wife's like, I don't know, for this territory, I don't know if this is worth it. But she joins in as well. She ends up blowing a guy away with a fucking shotgun. But yeah, if you just wanted to show from the moment Pat Garrett rides in the town and starts pushing over the thief to the point of Slim Pickens' death, it would play like a self-contained, astonishing little short film set in the West.
Exactly. And I love the fact that, someone who's so known for big body counts and violence and everything goes, no, fuck you. We're going to sit here. We're going to watch this guy. I know we just met him, but this is as big a tragedy as anything.
Yeah.
And with the music playing too, of Garrett killing Black Harris, played by L.Q. Jones, one of the kids' gang members. And he says, we ought not to be doing this to each other. It's an elegy also for maybe not even that character, but just the fact that the sadness of the fact that Garrett is going and he's going to destroy himself.
Yeah, he's like, we rode into this territory together. And I love how they're bonding and L.Q. Jones is asking him questions. And those questions seem sincere, but each time Coburn responds, L.Q. Jones will then like fire where the noise is. So it's like he's desperately trying to kill him while at the same time having like a drinking buddies conversation you would have like with an old friend that you haven't seen in a long time. And both scenes play perfectly well on top of each other, and is what makes it so fucking incredible. And what allows you to watch it 100 times and never get tired of it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah. And that becomes later when most of Bill dies too. You have that, you also have that feeling. This is all, it is tragic that these people are wrapped up in this and can't find another way outside of murdering each other. It is sad,
It reminds me of the way I feel about filmmakers from the 70s, because in 1974, for me, the best era of filmmaking was very rapidly drawing to a close, the early 70s in Hollywood. And as we in 2024 watch all these legends from that period dying, retiring, fading away, for me, the death of 70s filmmakers is like the death of all these outlaws for Sam Peckinpah. And it also makes this whole movie feel so bittersweet in so many ways, because this and movies like Chinatown and other movies that came out around this time, it is truly the end of an era. The late 70s is very different from the early 70s. And those days are closing fast, as they frequently say in the world of Sam Peckinpah.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I don't know if I would say celebrates, but well, let's just say that because I've been drinking in the morning and I can't articulate myself well. But he celebrates the individual, the outlaw and everything, but he was also like, yeah, but someone who is an outlaw is probably a piece of shit too. You know what I mean? And so he celebrates that spirit, but it's also like, well, this also comes with it. Like this character trying to express his freedom in whatever way possible, whether or not forces come after him, he's still going to steamroll people. You know, the outlaws. You know, you want to celebrate that outlaw spirit, but at the same time, they're bad people. They're outlaws for a reason. You know, and he'll never give you that easy answer. You know, he and about the West, about violence.
If you want easy answers, there are a million other Westerns out there that are subpar movies that'll give you all the easy answers you're looking for. Answers are not what Peckinpah, what he was interested in.
Yeah, and there's just so many surface level readings of this film because he has like, you know, Chris Christopherson and his bandmate Johnny Fritz.
I don't know what to think until the filmmaker totally spells it out. It's like, yeah, you're a dumb person and you're watching movies made by dumb people. Man, go have your fun with those. But yeah, Peckinpah is offering a different experience.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll be posting more about the film now. I think I'm gonna have to write a thread about the casting of Christopherson and his age. But
also, even if we have our issues with this package, at least it's opening up the conversation again and making it exciting and relevant again. Like, there are going to be some nerds who are like 19 or 20 years old who get completely obsessed with Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid the way we did a million years ago. And they're going to begin their own journey studying the history and reading the books and watching the movies. And so I am thankful that Criterion has put so much effort into just keeping this topic alive. But we are officially breaking my rule where I say you're never supposed to spend more time talking about a movie than the running time itself. Because if the filmmaker can tell his story in 2 hours and 2 minutes, we should be able to sing its praises. So final word from David Lambert. Where can people find you? Any final thoughts about the movie? And then it's time to put a bow on this, the type of bow that Peckinpah would never provide.
Well, first of all, I'm going to have to call bullshit because we have so many cuts of this movie that honestly, it should be about 10 to 12 hours.
Oh, fair enough. Point is well taken.
But also, yes, you need to cut me off at some point because I'll just be talking about it for the rest of the day. I think the set is great. I mean, my disappointment is always going to be there, but you know what? That is this movie, right? This movie is disappointment. This movie is it is what it is. That's part of the nature of it. It's part of the texture of it. And like I said, like even in its really butchered form in the theatrical version, it still retains power. That's the first version of the movie I saw.
Yeah,
and whether it's slaughtered,
like 80% of it is fucking astonishingly good scenes.
Yeah, exactly. And so with this new Cedar cut and everything, it's like I consider it in a way an illegitimate version of the film. But if someone were to watch it, I don't think that's a bad thing. You know what I mean? I still think it retains so much of the film's power, you know.
After the first 10 minutes, I almost have no complaints about the new version of the movie. I can totally watch it and enjoy it. It's just losing that opening credit sequence makes me freak the fuck out.
Yeah. Well, I just would want to tell everybody, like, there's no version of this movie that I think is a bad movie. And if any of the versions that you watch, I would hold off on the theatrical. Don't make that your first one. But that's a curiosity.
It looks really, really good. Like, this is the best version of the theatrical cut that you will ever see in terms of being widescreen, restored, rich color. Like, most people discovered the theatrical cut on like VHS, pan and scan back in the 80s, and that was subpar.
Yeah, but I would say if any version of this movie grabs you, then explore all of them. Explore what you can, if you feel so inclined. I think that's just the best way to go about it. It's never going to be just like the basement tapes.
I watched a triple feature of the movie in the last day or two. Watching it, I would just go from one version to the next. I was never bored. Sometimes I was flying into a rage, but I was just luxuriating in and soaking in the experience. And it blew my mind that I could watch a triple feature of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid and still have so much goddamn fun, even though it's a movie I've been watching now for over a quarter century. You would think it would hold no surprises for me, but it's still irresistible.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, it's just like the Dylan basement tapes. It's like, yeah, You want that loose thing. You can't make those into Highway 61 Revisited. You can't make those into Blonde on Blonde. It's not a good idea necessarily to try. You just have to enjoy what it is and what it was intending to be and what it could have been. And that's always going to be wrapped up in this film. And it's a fascinating movie. It's my favorite movie. It's a deeply flawed movie. But I honestly do think that it really is the richest, most measured meditation on the West, on the Old West on film, and even much more than that. So yeah, my highest possible recommendation: people pick it up, watch every version, but go to archive.org, see that version. Get the link from James. Get that version too. Watch every version.
They all disappear off the internet. Buy some DVDs and save them, because it looks pretty goddamn good on the second disc. The colors aren't quite as rich as the Criterion 50th anniversary version, but the colors are rich enough. But I just can't thank you enough for giving me a cinephile birthday present by giving us a 2-hour opportunity to rant and rave about one of my all-time favorite movies as well. So everybody, hunt down David Lambert. If you feel so inclined, give him some support on his Patreon. Enjoy the naked ladies and all that good stuff. Or if you feel so inclined, enjoy Warren Oates in whatever way you choose to enjoy him. He's got a plethora of riches there just waiting to be discovered. And David Lambert will be back on this channel in the not so distant future, because we got Horizon Chapter 2 to discuss in the very near future, which I imagine will be a different discussion than we just had about Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid.
I'm expecting it to replace Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid as my favorite Western.
Eternal optimism. I like it. Well, we can't thank you enough for watching this video and sticking with us. Looking forward to a wide range of comments down below. Hunt us down online if you want to push back on any of our assertions. We welcome it. The discussion, the debate is part of what keeps this movie going. But if you like this video, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. Hope everybody has an amazing weekend, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.
He's looking at you, kid.
I'm Charles Foster Kane! Hey, Stella!
Suck on this.